All right, Garrett. I know we talked a little bit before, but still, uh, consider most of my audience is in Asia. Can you like introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Garrett Blakey. I'm the head strength and conditioning coach with the Canadian men's national program, and I'm the head strength and conditioning coach for the Salt Lake City Stars in the NBA G League, and an assistant with the big team, the Utah Jazz.
Nice, nice. So, uh, obviously last week we spent a lot of time at Chicago. So, and I figured that a lot of the G League guys have their own story before they came to the league. So, do you mind like share your story before like you came in the league?
Yeah, for sure. Most of my story takes place in Canada, so um, started as an athlete myself. Obviously, was never good enough to reach the levels that I work in now, playing basketball. But started as an athlete myself, and just fell in love with training and everything that kind of went into it, like changing and modifying my diet to try and meet different goals. Various different tests that they would try to run at the facility that I was at the time, and things like that. And I just kind of fell in love. And so from there, I started in school in a program called Fitness and Health Promotion up in Canada. It's a 2-year college diploma program. In the US, you would probably call it like a community college style program. But for me, it was perfect. It was just enough to get my feet wet. I had been recovering from an injury that took up a lot of my time and sort of brain power towards the end of my high school time. And then obviously started in college and tried to get my feet wet a little bit more in the sport world and in the training world, and worked with everyone from Gen Pop to elite hockey players, which is just such a common demographic in Canada. And from there, transitioned, did more school, got my undergraduate degree at Ontario Tech University up in Canada, and then around that time, I honestly at that point it's try to get involved, right? See what opportunities are out there. And so for me, always loving the sport of basketball, it was kind of like this natural next step. And I got super, super lucky. Our director with the national team at the time had been treating me for that injury that I was coming back from. And we were talking about, what they do on the national team side and that kind of stuff. And he was like, kind of knew what I was doing in school. And he was like, would you be interested in like volunteering, like coming on to be an intern? Said, yeah, what the heck? So I started, and the rest is history, as they say. But went through, got into my master's program. So did my 2-year master's. All the while I was working for Canada Basketball. By that point, I was in charge of all the youth physical development stuff. We still had somebody on the senior men's side, and then once that person kind of stepped away, and I was starting my PhD, it was like, hey, we've had this guy, working, grinding with our young athletes, knows, all of our senior men's guys. Why don't we bring him up and give him that opportunity? And so kind of took the ball and ran with it. And that was back in 2022, 2023. So and yeah, ever since then it's been, just different opportunities to try to get to the league and advance the career a little bit. So yeah, that's the long-winded backstory.
Nice, nice. So, is NBA always always a thing you want to pursue? Is it always a dream job for you?
No, no, I don't think it always was or always has been. I think for me, my biggest goal was always just to work with the best of the best. And where do you find those people? In the NBA? And I've been so fortunate to do what I've done on the national stage. I say it all the time, but hearing your anthem played before a big game, there's nothing like it. Even if you're just that small cog in the watch, um, there's just nothing like it. And so getting to work with the best of the best on the national team side has always been great. But I think you want to do it with the greatest athletes, but also at the highest level. And like I was saying, I think that is the NBA. So it wasn't always the goal, but I think the further along I got in my career, the closer I got to it and to the athletes that participate in it. I think the more I wanted, it pushed me in that direction, and that's why we're here today. Yeah, that's a good
Nice,
question.
nice. So, all right. So I think a few weeks ago I saw like you had Sportsmith posted one of like your article talk about internal load versus external load. And I was like, this is really interesting because maybe I'm wrong, but like in the state, not a lot of people really like uh really track internal load anymore. So talk to me about like your original thought about like tracking those two and kind of like comparing those two.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, shout out Sportsmith. They published an article that I had written, mostly looking at some of the international data, but also just some kind of like theory and case studies and things that I had hypothesized. And um, so, anyways, if you're listening and you get bored and you want to read something, it's up there. Uh, in terms of like internal load, I absolutely agree. I think it's something that's sort of underappreciated in today's world, especially with some of the external load metrics being so commonly used and looked at, especially in the sport of basketball. Rightfully so, right? We should be aware of the number of events, various events, accelerations, decelerations, jumps. The exertion of those jumps or the intensity of those jumps. I think those are all great things to be aware of, but my my take has always been that you can't tell the full picture without looking at both. And my argument for that is that, and I don't think it's super hotly contested, but when you look at external load, that's the work that we've done. So the session is over. This is what we've done. The internal load tells us what the cost of that work was. So there's a cost to an individual athlete and there's a cost to the group, and that's going to really tell us the extra piece of the story that we might be missing without including it. And so, like the common metrics that we're always looking at there is like training impulse, right? TRIMP, as everyone likes to refer to it as, uh, heart rate response, the recovery, and things like that. I mean, HRV, that's a whole other can of worms, maybe for another day, but just all extra pieces to the puzzle. And from my experience coming up as a young strength coach, I was working for the national team. Our budget was limited. And so we gravitated towards what we could afford, but also what made, the most sense for us. So it was almost like that age old expression, right? The most bang for your buck. And in that case, we were using heart rate monitors and pairing that with subjectivity. What was, what was your RPE or time spent on feet, like those kind of things to sort of help us look at external load without actually having like an IMU or a Kinexon or something like that available. So we were looking at heart rate and what that was doing at various points in our cycle, what that was doing at various points throughout our camp, and what it meant. And so that was where the fascination sort of started for me. And then obviously now getting closer to the league and being able to have access to so much more data and technology, now it's like, okay, now we can really put this puzzle together, um, and that's a key piece for me.
Hmm. All right. So before we dive a little bit deeper into the metrics or like heart rate, all that stuff, um, talk to me about talk to me about like because load management is a big word right now. Everybody uses that word, but not a lot of people really understand like what exactly is load management. Load management doesn't really mean you have to do less. Sometimes it means like you have to do more in order to do less. But like talk to me about how you manage or like your understanding of load management, especially in basketball, G League or Canadian basketball team.
Yeah, so obviously with my very unique backgrounds, we'll say, right, the professional side and the international side, there's some pretty big differences there, specifically when it comes to the competition structure. With the national team, we don't have 82 games or the G League season, right? 50 games to kind of prove ourselves and manage through it, we either get three. In some cases, we might get five. The Olympics a great example. We got 3 games to go out against our group and prove ourselves. Load management doesn't really enter the equation. Maybe a little bit in the lead up to that tournament, depending on how many games prior to competition we're going to play. How long the athlete's season was. For example, did they make an NBA Finals, or did they finish after game 82? How many minutes were they playing with their team? Because that's another thing, right? They might come into our environment and play 35 minutes a game, in a 40-minute game where they only played 2 or 3 minutes during the NBA season on average. So they might be coming off of a very restful season, or the inverse is true for us as well, right? They might play 30 minutes, 35 minutes a game in the NBA, get all the way through to the NBA finals, and now they're entering an international competition where we know they're a key piece for us, right? So just a very different structure than maybe the NBA season. So I'll say not a huge problem for me on the international side because we've got to kind of push and go. Like I said, there's a couple of cases where it might, enter the chat, but on the NBA or the G League side, obviously huge discussion. There's talk of, the length of the season, the effect on athletes, those back to backs, those kind of things. And so, I mean, my response to, you know, this phenomena, if you will, is really just what works best. What works best for the athlete, what works best for the team in a given context. Um, you'll hear interviews with some of the greatest coaches of all time who just understood that, you know, we know that this is the end goal, right? And that this is the NBA finals or an NBA championship. And so it's how do we get there? We know progress isn't linear. We know, all those age-old cliches, but at the end of the day, the point remains the same. It's this is the goal. The goal is not, win game 56 on the road. This is the goal. And so how do we best get there? And that's where, the communication between coaching staff and performance staff can be so key. But I feel like you're inching towards another question here. So that's sort of my initial thoughts or my real thought process about it.
Nice, nice, nice. All right. So uh let's dive deep into like how you uh compare internal and external load and how you like because in the article you said like there in the article you mentioned like maybe sometimes the external load are high but it's nothing for them, but maybe in the like some other times the external load are pretty low but it's pretty hard for them. So talk to me about that, the quadrant if you.
Yeah, yeah. So again, it's sort of a case by case basis, and it's one of the biggest things that we'll do almost regardless of the situation that I'm in is we want to get a really solid baseline. So while we don't do a true heart rate max test, we try to get our athletes, as close to that as we can to get a better understanding of response to exercise. As we know, there's various things that will impact internal load, or our heart rate in general, right? Sleep, travel schedule, busy travel schedule. I obviously, mention a bunch of these things in the article, but what we want to do is get as good of a baseline as we can so that throughout the season, we're seeing how each athlete is responding to various levels of stress. And, you use that example there, but I'll go to my like great return to play examples. The stress or, the actual the work that was done might be the same. So 2 months ago, I sprained my ankle. This is the work that we were doing at that time. Let's say, we'll use arbitrary units, whatever, 75 arbitrary units, then is still 75 arbitrary units 2 months later, post ankle, post everything else. But my heart rate might tell a different story. And that gives us insight, right? That gives us data. Because if I just looked at the work, then I would say the work is the same. It's about the cost. And so while that athlete might have done or gone through a very, very similar workout, um, a similar drill, a similar scrimmage to 2 months or to prior to injury, um, their heart rate might tell us something very different. It might say the signals might be, hey, we need a little bit more conditioning work here before we're fully ready to jump back in. And that is indicated by a higher trim. Um, heart rate is higher throughout the course of the session, right? And so that can be a pretty good indicator for us as well. In some cases, poor sleep. Um, Another great example that we see all the time is poor recovery or illness, right? When a player starts to get sick, maybe they don't really feel it yet. Heart rate doesn't lie with some of those things, right? And so when those things start to peak, while it doesn't fully answer the question for us, it certainly leads us closer to the answer or towards the right direction. Otherwise, again, the external load might be the same. It might look similar to the rest of the team. It might look similar to, their previous sessions, but that heart rate is really telling us a different story. And so by using both, that's when I think that, we can really start to answer and address some of those big questions. And I mean, we were just talking about, load management. Um, Sometimes, yeah, back to back suck, and players get sick. There are problems at home. There's problems, in the family. Whatever it is, all these things are going to affect them differently. Um, but without some of this subjective data, it's really hard to look at the coach and say, yeah, I just think he should rest a little more today, or I think we should do less today, right? The more information we can bring to the table, I think, the better our odds are of getting somewhere with that conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So the following question is, obviously, like at this era, if you work with basketball, like you're gonna have some sort of like low report, connects on, catapult, whatsoever. So if you're combining the internal load, are you presenting the internal load also to the coaching staff? And will that sometimes be a little bit too much for them to understand?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say my overarching statement here is that it always depends on the coach. So it depends on who you're talking to. One of our national team coaches from a few years ago, he was coaching at the U18, U19 level. He was a kinesiology major in school. And so he would have more questions about some of the data that we were collecting. He would want maybe more detail in the reports. I would oftentimes sit with him at breakfast and break down, what I had sent him. Okay, so this is telling us this, or this is telling us that. Whereas I've also had other coaches, more on the professional side who are just give me a green light, give me a red light, and give me a yellow light, and we'll talk about it when we see each other. And sometimes it is that simple. So I'll say it totally depends on the coach that you're working with. But I think there is value in sharing some of that information. It's just in knowing how to share that information. And so for me, I try to keep things simple. I try to keep it bite sized and digestible because nobody is reading my 13 pages of reports and graphs and no, like I'm not Garrett, I'm not clicking past the first page, right? Okay, great. I'm going to give you one page or one um, little slide, little PowerPoint slide, right? With some, like I said, digestible information. These three players, this happened, or we are seeing this trend. We're going to address it. This is what it means to you. Um, I never tell a coach what to do. It's not my business, but I can definitely give suggestions. That's my space to, give suggestions. But my favorite way to report some of that stuff, again, I can let the training room know, I can prepare more detailed reports for them, depending on what we agree is relevant or what trends we might be seeing. But my favorite way to get some of that information across is just meeting with the people. I'll catch coach, 30 minutes before practice, 45 minutes before practice. Maybe he's preparing, the plan for the day. Hey, coach, just got something quick. Did you see it? I sent it over. Do you have any questions? Yeah, I saw that you sent something. Um, yeah, this is what I'm thinking for today. Okay, cool. Based on what I sent you, do you think we could? And then the conversation, kind of goes from there. And that to me sometimes is just the easiest way to get a point across or to share some of that information because like I said, nobody's ever reading the full, 13 pages worth of reports, maybe the general manager, right? But to be able to make that impact day to day, I think sometimes personal, like just that personal communication, having a good relationship there is key.
Hmm. All right. So, uh, obviously, like, uh, before the G League, you had a lot of experience with the Canadian national basketball team. Um, do you? So, I guess the question is, before you enter the league, do you have access to like all this technology? And if not, like, how you prepare yourself for like s- like job like this? You constantly have to provide data. You constantly have to do this, like force play jump all the time, right?
Yeah, I think so. To your first point or your first question there, again, we were limited resource wise with the national team, but we still that it didn't necessarily stop us. I believe it was 2022, 2023. We had hired an assistant, kind of on a part-time basis, and through collaboration, we were able to secure some funding, and that was the first time that we had actual full-time access to force decks with the national team, and that was fantastic. I mean, all of a sudden, um, it was a huge learning curve for myself because that wasn't, I mean, when I was going through school, that wasn't just something that they were able to pull out. Now I understand, what a lot of programs they're teaching you about, not just how to test, but what you're testing for and what you're looking for. And, um, so I didn't have a ton of experience before getting the force decks. And then all of a sudden it was like, I remember my knees hurting so much that summer. We were jumping, doing different things, depth, drop jumps, repeated hop tests. I mean, we were trying out all kinds of different things, right? Just constantly looking at, what we could do with them. And so I think that was like a huge piece for me, just eye-opening, big learning experience to just better understand, yeah, what it is that we could do with these plates, these, things of metal that just sit on the floor, and actually start to answer some questions related to performance. And it also led to, a research group that we had kind of put together uh, through McMaster University and some great partnerships there to just really start to answer the questions. So I think ahead of getting to the G League and in the NBA is it was huge. That kind of exposure was huge. Those are the things that you can bring up in interviews. Those are the things that you can talk about and touch on that, hey, yeah, I have experience with this. We also used, like I mentioned earlier, right, like heart rate monitors and proxy measures, or I guess we'll say like subjective and objective measures of readiness. And um, those were those were definitely big time for me, just in preparing me for getting into the league. Because like you said, right, you're constantly collecting data. I'm a big believer that we collect data for a purpose. There's a point to it. We can't just be collecting data for the sake of collecting data. And so at that time, I mean, again, I can collect as much data as I want on myself, but on the athletes that we work with, right, we want to be so careful. And so um, at that time, it was great to be able to provide extra insight to our training staff, provide extra insight to our performance team, and to our coaches as well, um, on everything from readiness to actual performance. And yeah, definitely, again, learned some tough lessons at the time too about how much data is maybe too much data for coaches and stakeholders. Um, but no, it was absolutely it was huge. So highly
Hmm.
recommend.
All right. So, talk to me about like your game day. What's your game day like? Because different athletes have like different routine. Coaches have their own routine. Strength coaches, we have our own routine. So talk to me about like what's a game day look like for you, and like what are some things you really need to like accomplish, or like you really need this guy to jump, or you really need him to like hop on a table, something like that.
Yeah, like you said, I think some guys have their own routines, in the same way that we have our own routines. And so when we're at home, it's great. We have access to more. Um, Oftentimes we would jump in the morning if we had shoot around. That was because we could. Um, we unfortunately, again, it's the G League, so you're limited on sort of what you can do. But we weren't traveling force plates this year, so we would jump in the morning, shoot around of game days. Again, it was just a really good touch point with the athletes, so that was big for us. Outside of that, it's make sure that we get those touch points with the athletes before they get on court. On the road, I'm a big fan of setting up on the baseline because everybody's going to go out to shoot, and so just having that, even if it's just a quick, hey, 2 sets. I got 2 sets of something real quick for you. Grab them off the court. That's also the international kind of way of doing things. We don't get a fancy weight room on the on the road with the national team. So for me, it's always great to just be able to set up on the baseline. Perfect. We get our groups through, and then that way we get some work in before they get on court. Um, at home here, we have access to the weight room, so we're able to accomplish a little bit more in that kind of 15-minute window. Um, Trying to think what else. Game days are great. Game days are great. It's a really easy way to just, in a world where, you've got winning and you've got losing and sort of you've got this small performance window of 2 hours. It is kind of funny, like how much else goes into it. And that's, our pregame activations, our postgame lifts, um, that morning shoot around. There really is just so much that kind of goes into it, and so many different areas where you can actually impact your guys and impact your athletes. Um, yeah, I guess that last piece there, just a good post game lift, keep it short and sweet. A really good opportunity for the guys to come in and um, exert a little extra, or even just get out some anger from whatever just happened in the game, kind of depending on how it goes for you and the team. We'll mandate some of them, but a lot are optional, just based on, again, guys' individual routines. And one of the greatest things about the G League is that you know you're there to try and make this guy more money, get him a better opportunity, and it's one coach on 10, 12, 15 athletes. Sometimes it's really hard to be, you know, dragging people with you as you go. And so I've been very fortunate to have some good groups of guys who are willing to put in that extra work and and yeah, I think that's about it for my game day.
Nice, nice. All right. So, um, like we talked a little bit before, do you still track athletes' heart rate like in like G League level or not?
So we do. The G League is kind of special because technically certain approved wearables are available to use during the games. Now, with various external load monitoring services that offer you different things, we haven't done that as of yet. I also think it's really, really hard to get buy-in from athletes, even though you're allowed to wear it during the game. That does not mean that I can mandate it, right? Hey, wear this really uncomfortable strap or this tight-fitting undershirt underneath your jersey during a game. While I know that we'd have a few athletes that would be willing to do it, the vast majority would not, be interested. So we're collecting heart rate data during practice. So guys, just it's an understanding. They know, before practice starts, what they need to do and what they need to accomplish, and we just build it into their routine, making sure that they have all the pieces of tech and sports science equipment, equipped and ready to go before we get started. And so that gives us a really good idea of how athletes are responding throughout the season. Early in the season, when you might have more scrimmages and stuff like that, that gives you a good proxy or a good understanding of their heart rate or their internal load response to game action. And then later in the season, okay, great, we've got that data. Now we're looking more for recovery. and sort of how they're responding to the various loads. Even if it's the day after a game, 2 days after a game, where are we at? Even if our external load is relatively low, what was the cost of that work? And does that align with where it should be? So we're using it for practice and things like that. Definitely would love to be able to use it in game, but like I said, I mean, as somebody who has had multiple heart rate monitors thrown at them through the years, um, not something that I'm willing to, you know, to to lose sleep over.
All right. Um, so just random question. This might be stupid, but since we have LPS or GPS data, also have heart rate. Do you think like does that match with what you're seeing on the force plate or what you're seeing on the court? Or is there a trend?
Okay, so you mean like when you put all of those pieces together? Yeah. So I mean, for us, you're constantly looking for the trends. It doesn't necessarily mean that there will be one. I mean, I have great examples of like, high quality work from an external load standpoint, a good cost to that work, but very low output in the force plate. Like we might see, let's say we jump before practice, we might see like 10-12% drop in our our metrics of choice, and then they go out and they give us really really high quality work, with a great cost, right? The great training impulse. Whereas before practice I might have said, this is probably one of those guys to circle for today. This might be a relatively low output, this might not look so pretty. And we've seen the inverse too. We come in, everything on the force plates tell us we are ready to go. Wow, this is fantastic. This is, here we go. This is great. Let's scrimmage 5-on-5. And then all of a sudden it's, maybe the cost of the work is there, or sorry, the work is there, but the cost just really isn't. And we see all levels of examples of that throughout the season, but we're always looking for the trends, and what a guy is doing at any given time. And um, I will say, with all of those random examples of individuals, normally when you look at the team, that trend is fantastic. When you look at the team, like I said earlier, when you want to investigate those individual cases, that's where we dive in the rabbit holes, and when we can try to answer some questions as best we can. But normally, when you look at the team, those things generally match up. If we've got low output on the plates and a heavy cost to the amount of work that we did on that given day, fantastic. Yeah, the guys are tired. We knew they were tired. They showed us they're tired. They're tired. Um, and like I said, the inverse can be true too. The guys had excellent force outputs. Fantastic. We're going to go out there and scrimmage. We get great quality of work and great quantity of work, right? And so normally those trends do tend to line up as a group, I'll say.
Hmm. All right. Uh, so question not relevant to like the whole training load whatsoever. So correct me if I'm wrong. So before you took the job with the Jazz right now, you work with Canadian basketball team for 10 years. And prior to that, you're also a personal trainer, right? So at this era, like especially in the state, you can see like young strength coaches graduate from master degree and shit up getting maybe a D1 par for a job somewhere, like Olympic sport whatsoever. Um, do you think like having the experience 10 years in Canadian basketball or even like personal training, how does that prepare you for this job, the handling all those chaos?
I can't remember who had posted about it. Saw something the other day. I think as a personal trainer, or as somebody who has had to manage various populations in my life, working with large groups is always a skill that you can transfer. Working with large groups is like there are so many people that when you get into a high performance environment, and I saw other interns, and I myself was one of those people back in the day, but when you get into a high performance setting, it's really easy to focus your eyes on one person and help that one person today. Can I walk them through their program? Can I show them a good warm up? What can I do here? It's very different when you scale it up and now you're talking about a team of individuals, even like small group training, 3 to 6 people, where it's we might be doing similar things in the weight room. We're probably going to warm up together. But now when we split, I've got to have my eyes here. I got to have my eyes here. And as a coach, right, it's one of the harder things to do. And so I think that is a big one for me, is just having the experience training large groups of individuals and then getting out onto the floor, being able to coach those people. Um, Trying to think what else. I mean, obviously, my 10 years in the Canadian basketball scene, having started as an intern and working my way up to where I am now, that definitely helps, prepare me just being in the basketball arena and understanding the sport a little bit better. And so I think that's another thing is if somebody's looking to get into, Division 1 athletics, maybe you've never been a swimmer before, but you saw that posting for, a mid-major swimming S&C coach, or maybe you're going to handle swimming, some Olympic sports, or um, who knows what it is, but you've never played tennis before. Understand the sport, know who it is that you're going to be working with, understand the demands of the sport, understand the scoring of the sport, how the sport works, maybe a couple of the big names, not just for your, not just to get your name in the front door and kind of get your opportunity to interview, but understand that because now if you end up in that job, that's how you're going to relate to those athletes on day one. It's about their sport. That's their life. And so for me, obviously that was key. And I think, the last thing, if I can, was just the networking piece. And, as a personal trainer, even looking back now, there were people that I worked with that I'm still connected with and will check in on every once in a while and see how they're doing. I worked in university sport in Canada from 2000 and I want to say 17 till 1920, right before COVID. And so while I was doing some schoolwork, I was also working in the weight room. And a lot of the athletes that we had back then, specifically some of the teams that I worked one on one with or was responsible for, I'm still connected with some of those athletes. I mean, I'll go play golf with some of them every once in a while now that, they're off working wherever they're working. We'll catch up on the phone or whatever. So I think like building those relationships with your athletes, but also, networking and finding other coaches that do what you do or are interested in the same sort of things. And I think that would be another big piece that, that I had kind of picked up early on, which definitely helped me get to where I'm at sort of today.
Nice, nice. All right. Um, with all the technology, AI, more and more research going on, what are some topics or I don't know, yeah, what are some topics or technology or like research you're interested in right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think some of the advances in AI are super helpful, depending on how you use them, if that sort of makes sense. Um, I'll say again, a lot of my questions, because of, like my own personal interests and stuff, are actually in the world of like talent selection, talent identification, and specifically physical metrics that might equate or not equate at all to, success at higher levels. And obviously, I mentioned earlier doing a PhD, and that's a big focal point of mine is what are scouts and general managers looking for, looking at, what do they think equates to success, and then does it actually mean anything? And the does it actually mean anything is sort of where I like to live. So investigating a little bit more about, um, like wingspan and height ratios and NBA success, looking into, questions about, peak power outputs at a young age and whether that's at all relevant to who this athlete then becomes down the road. Um, there's this whole phenomenon of like, if I test these athletes at a young age, and this is done in Canada, the US, all over the world, but if I test these athletes at a young age, then I can put them into a bucket based on the sport that they would be best at. I don't know about you, but I don't know what bucket I would have been put at, put in as an 11-year-old, but I promise I probably wouldn't have loved the sport as much as I love basketball. Um, but I was never going to make it to the NBA. And so it's sort of like questions like that are something that interests me a lot. I know that's not, in the technology world necessarily, but those are some of like the big broad questions that I think about often. Um, I'll say on the tech sort of side of things, it's 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 honestly it's the integration of systems. And you asked me a great question, right? Like, are we talking about trends with when we're looking at the force play? We have access to so much data right now, but how do we actually integrate those together and make it work? And I was talking with a coworker just the other day who raised a really good point. Like, other sports do a really good job of integrating their data, but it's because their data is so clean. I don't know about you, Eric. I mean, basketball data can be messy.
Yeah.
Why are we missing the counter movement jump for just this one guy on this one day, but then the next day we get him, but we're missing two other guys? And that's just, one random example, but like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it happens all the time. And it's like, well, his knee was just absolutely chewing at him one day, and the next day he woke up and felt like he could jump 45 inches. So it's like, again, there's just so much mess, so much nuance. But I think that's a big thing for me, is just integrating systems and just doing a better job in general, across the sporting landscape, but specifically within the world of basketball. It's just taking all of this stuff that we do, and we think we do so well, and there are a lot of people that do it. It's just, we do it. Now, how do we integrate it and bring it all together, and what does that look like? How do we optimize that? What does that being optimized even look like? And I think that's, again, another very broad strokes question, but it's something that I think about all the time.
Mm. All right. Um, I think one of the reason I want to have you on, first of all, you're Canadian. I'm a Canadian too. Yep. Second is like we are in G League right now, and G League is a different type of grind, right? And you get like we will get message from like I don't know, random people from at LinkedIn, Instagram, like, yo, how do you make it to the league? How do you like whatsoever? And you already answered it a little bit, but still, for the young guys out there who want to make it to the league, who want to be at your position, who want to maybe work for Canadian national basketball team, like what are some advice you give it you give them?
Yeah, I'll go back and I'll just kind of reiterate one more time. I mean, the connections that you make are so meaningful, and it's hard to make those connections through LinkedIn. It can happen, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing. I mean, we like you said. I mean, yeah, I get a lot of messages of people on LinkedIn, and I think that's fantastic. I myself send messages on LinkedIn, and I think it's a great way to sort of start connecting with other individuals. But um, that just can't be like your only source of meeting people and connecting with pros in the industry and stuff. I think attending conferences, and um, sometimes it just is what it is. But internship opportunities, taking those one-offs, get into a building for a couple of days, lend a hand, because now I'm making connections, but I'm also showing my stuff, right? In my example, I got so lucky. I got so lucky. Hey, do you want an internship with us? It's not going to pay you anything, but you can come out and meet some people. We'll give you a t-shirt. Like, hey, it's fun. Yeah, absolutely. Taking the internship or getting in the door is one thing, but like I say all the time, like, you've really got to kick it open at that point, and just take it over, right? Show them that they were right to trust you, or they were right to bring you in, and whether that's first one in, last one out, or at least that mentality. Doing extra work on the side, little side projects, finding out how else you can make an impact. I think those things are all super valuable in terms of advice to sort of get to this level. I think those extra letters are always great, but just just remembering that, like, life is this whole process, and learning it just occurs at every stage. And so being a sponge, I think, is probably the best way to encapsulate that. And just, I am myself by no means a finished product. And you're right. There's a lot of people that would love to be in my shoes and, have some of the opportunities that I've had. Um, but there's more for me too. Like there's other heights that I want to achieve myself. Um, and for me, that, I mean, remaining a sponge, remaining open to new information, learning something new from everybody that you talk to. That's sort of like this mentality that I go into, and it's not always easy. It's not always easy. We like to, we do what we do because we like to like we're smart people. We're smart people. We're connected, and we like working in sport. Um, but everybody out there can teach you something. Everybody can teach you something, and so I think that's you know some of the best advice I can give just to try to get here. Like I said, make connections. Those are the people that matter. Make meaningful connections. Don't just message someone on LinkedIn one time and then expect them to interview you immediately for a new open role that you might have. Um, I mean, Instagram is another one of those places, but it can be great to start that relationship and then yeah, develop it kind of as you go. So I think that's probably the best advice that I can give.
Nice. Nice.